Hello everyone, welcome to episode 72 of our weekly CRICKETher Vodcast. We're back at Lords today for another exciting round of matches in the 100, and today it's going to be London Spirit v Southern Brave. First of all, here's a quick reminder from Sid about the way that the table looks at the moment.
Coming up to the halfway point in the Women's 100, here's how the table currently looks on Sunday morning. Don't forget that the sides play each other once, plus an extra match against their local derby rivals, so that's 8 games in total. After Saturday's action, we have the Superchargers on top with 7 points, and the Brave in second place with 6 points, but with a game in hand. Then we've got the Invincibles in third on 4 points. Remember, you need to finish in the top 3 to have a chance of winning the tournament. The team that finishes first goes straight through to the final, while the teams finishing second and third fight it out in the Eliminator to join them at Lords. With 19 fixtures remaining, there are over 1 billion potential outcomes. Now, 1 billion is a big number. It's far too many scenarios to go through by hand. So over the lockdown, I wrote a computer program in a language called C# to do it for me. It takes my program about 2.5 hours to plough through all those possibilities. So I set it to work early this morning, and this is what it found. The good news is that everyone can still qualify for the knockout stages. In fact, everyone can still technically win the league and qualify directly for the final, even the originals, who are currently bottom of the table. And never forget what happened in the first WBBL, when the Sydney Sixers lost their first 6 games, but still came back to win the tournament. So, everyone can still do it, but there are some important caveats. The first is that star next to the qualification. While everyone can still qualify, the star indicates that you aren't dependent on other results to do so. Your destiny is in your own hands. So for the Rockets and the originals, things are out of their own hands. Even if they win all their remaining games, they could still miss out on finishing third if other results don't go their way. The qualification percentage is also a really important number. Remember I told you there were just over 1 billion scenarios? The Superchargers on 94% and the Brave on 92% qualify for the knockouts in almost all those scenarios. The odds are very much in their favour. And despite their loss to the Superchargers on Saturday, the Invincibles also remain odds-on to make it into that top 3. At the other end of the table, however, it is looking very dicey for the originals. They qualify in just 2% of those scenarios. It's not quite time for them to pack up and go home, but very soon it could be.
So as you've just explained there, Sid, Southern Brave are currently second in the table and the Northern Superchargers are at the top at the moment. What do you think has gone right for them so far in the competition?
Well, definitely some good selections, hasn't there been? We've had some good innings from some Indian players. So Jemima Rodriguez has made a massive contribution to where the Superchargers are. Smriti Mandana had a good match for the Brave in their second match. Danny White had a good match in the third match. But also really important to both those teams is the fact that they've got a good core of domestic players, and that they were able to deliver team efforts when it mattered. So in the fourth match, the Superchargers yesterday, Jemima Rodriguez didn't hit a load of runs for the first time, and that meant they had to fall back on everybody else. Alice Davison-Richardson played really well, but it was very much more of a team effort, I think, and that's going to be really important going forwards. You can't rely on your superstars every single time, and the Brave have done the same thing. So in the first match, no one massively came good, but everyone came to the party, and there's been little contributions from everyone that's still put them in a position to win the game, from people like Lauren Bell. So I think that having that good core of players there is what makes a difference.
Okay, and it's in a way, it's no coincidence that it's the 2 teams who were in the final of the Rachel Hayhoe Flint Trophy last season who are top of the table in the 100. I mean, obviously it's different branding and different team names, but essentially it's the same core of domestic players.
Yeah, there's a lot of those same players, aren't there? And particularly in Yorkshire and the Southern Brave. So Charlotte Edwards has, looked at her Southern Vipers squad, and she's gone, what pieces from this jigsaw fit into this other jigsaw that I'm building? And yeah, she's got in some different players. Particularly Sophia Dunkley was one player that Charlotte Edwards was targeting like a laser from day one of the announcement that this competition was going to be taking place, long before she was a regular England player like she is now. But though that core of domestic players is what makes all the difference. So that's the top 2 teams. Now the Invincibles are still in third, and as we said in our little video, they've still got a great chance of qualifying. What have they done right, Raf?
Well, they're no longer invincible. unfortunately. But it was a narrow loss yesterday, wasn't it, to the Superchargers. I think that Alice Capsey's plays a really significant role for them so far, and I know I keep banging on about her, and people are probably bored of me talking about her, but 16 years old, and I think that we saw here at Lords a week ago that half century in her first ever game at the home of cricket, and other people getting excited as well. So there's like a bit of a level of smugness on my part going, I picked her out and now she's come good, but I kind of knew she would. Anyway, it's not really anything to do with me, she's just brilliant, isn't she? The other important thing that she's been able to do yesterday for the Invincibles was actually bowling in the power play, wasn't it? And that was the first time she's bowled in the competition, and I know that when I interviewed her for The Guardian, she really didn't think that she was likely to get a chance to bowl. But we've seen that she's been very handy with her off spin in that power play and took a couple of wickets, and that was a really great performance from her. So I suspect that isn't the last time that we're going to see her bowl in those opening, I nearly said overs, in those opening balls. So good for her. Obviously, the reason that she was able to do that was, or the reason that she was asked to do that was because of the fact that Marizanne Kapp and Shabnim Ismail were sat out on the sidelines injured, which is actually a little bit of a worry for Invincibles going forward. And I think that they did miss, in particular, Kappy yesterday. In the run chase, didn't they? So yeah, that's a concern when two of your international superstars are injured. We don't have any information about how long they might be out for. So that might be a little bit of a concern.
Yeah, we were told originally that Kat was just a little niggle and they expected her to be back quite quickly, but she wasn't back again, so she missed 2 games now. And however good your backup players are, and again, that Surrey have developed some great young players like Eva Gray that are coming into the team, but there's no replacement for Marizanne Kapp, unfortunately, and there's a reason why she's listed by the ICC as, I believe, their number 1 all-rounder in the world, because her contributions with the bat have become so important to South Africa over the last couple of years, and they were going to be important here. So, and let's not forget, Invincible fans, don't lose heart. It was a very close game. It could easily have gone the other way. And they did 6 off the last ball. Maddie Villiers came out. I really thought that she could have done it. I wouldn't have bet my life savings on it. Sorry, Maddie. Love you, but not my life savings. But I felt there was a good chance she could have done it. She's hit a 6 in the tournament already, coming out right at the back end of an innings. And so it was very close. But they just didn't do enough up front, did they? They just left themselves with slightly too much to do, Raf.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on, and I think that what we're seeing is, to some extent, when we see these WinViz predictions, actually, for example, yesterday with Invincibles trying to chase that down, I think they needed sort of, 30 or 15 balls or whatever it was, and WinViz had them at a massive advantage. But even though they still had kind of 8 wickets in hand, I was a bit uncertain at that point, because when you leave yourself with that much to do at the end, when you've got to go over a runner ball, you really put yourself under big pressure there. So I think that to some extent WinViz gets those scenarios right at the end a little bit wrong in the women's game. It's obviously not really been any adjustments made from the men's game, and I think that's a mistake sometimes. So yeah, Invincibles really, they needed to get a shifty on in the middle period of the match. Again, nearly said overs. It's a difficult habit to escape from. Anyway.
Now, on Friday, we were down at Southampton and we saw the women's game, and then we stayed on for the men's game. And Raf, you actually covered that for the newspapers, Raf. What was that like as an experience?
Very strange. Well, first of all, it was exhausting because obviously you're doing 2 quite short, kind of exciting matches back to back. Obviously, the women's match ended up being the Brave won by quite a way, but at the halfway point, I thought that they might struggle to chase that down actually, so I had to do a bit of a rewrite there. And then the men's game ended up coming right down to the wire, and it's very difficult to write those when you are having to file basically on the nose. And the other thing is that then you do the press conferences straight after both matches for 2 different players, and you have to submit the quotes for those. So you end up kind of having just filed, and then you're straight into the next match, and it's very tiring actually. So I've maybe got a little bit more of an understanding now about why people perhaps don't show up right for the start of the women's match. I still think it's a shame, because I still think that they miss out ultimately, and if it was me, then I'd show up for the start of the women's and then leave before the end of the men's. Actually no, you probably can't really do that, can you? Anyway, so yeah, a little bit more of an understanding there about kind of the tiring nature of covering those 2 matches back to back. I thought it was interesting actually that when we turned up to cover the women's, we always kind of think, well, we're probably going to be some of the only people in the press box for those. We're quite used to that, and that's kind of par for the course over the years. But they said, we were expecting a lot of people in the press box, and they'd put up the full shebang, hadn't they, with sort of 4 or 5 different rows of chairs in the Ageas Bowl press box, rather than just having one row down the front, which is the kind of standard setup for Kia Super League matches, for example, or I guess probably men's county championship matches as well. But really, there weren't any more people in the press box for the men's game than there were for the women's game. It's interesting that the ECB are obviously very much touting this as a success in terms of the coverage that it's attracting, but I don't know whether that many people are actually going to the matches to cover the games, which is interesting, isn't it? I suppose there's a lot in a short space of time, and that's maybe tricky as a journalist, but I think that was quite interesting. That and I, for example, had to go into the post-match press conference with Moeen Ali and front up asking the questions, which isn't something that I'm particularly used to. Me and my new close personal friend Moeen Ali, who he obviously didn't have a clue who I was, which again was a slightly unusual experience. And I think that there was certainly a different level of detachment covering the men's game than I normally experience in the women's game now, because I know all the players in the women's game and kind of to some extent care about them and care about how they do. It's not necessarily about having a team affiliation. I know you obviously have your team affiliation, Sid, but for me sometimes it's about going, actually, Alice Davison-Richards, she's a great laugh, she's always got a smile on her face. I love it when she does well. Alice Capsey, kind of championed her to some extent. It's great when she does well. So you kind of form those connections, whereas for the men's game I really genuinely just felt very detached for proceedings, and also had to keep looking up the player names, which I guess is an experience that many people covering women's cricket go through. So it was a bit interesting for the shoe to be on the other foot for once. Sid, you obviously stayed for the men's game as well, because me and you, we stick together. What did you make of it all?
Well, it was an exciting game, wasn't it? It went right down to the wire, and the men had to bring in one of the fielders. They lost time and had to bring in a fielder for the last couple of balls, was it? And that seemed to make a big difference to the outcome. So it was definitely an exciting game of cricket, and the kind of good advert for cricket as an exciting thing to watch. Obviously, overall, impression was that there wasn't really anything about the men's game that made it particularly special over the women's game. I tried to look at it with a fan's eye view, and I'm struggling to see why anybody would particularly want to watch the men's game over the women's game. I think that they both have equal value, and they were both equally, good as a fan coming, as like a Brave fan coming down to the ground. If you came to the women's game, you saw Danny Wyatt hit a big innings. It wasn't a close game, but if you're a Brave fan, you're like, yeah, we won that game. Danny Wyatt was brilliant. She scored loads of runs, and she was great. And then if you're a men's fan, then you go, oh, well, we had an exciting and close game. You know what? I'm going to have to confess here, I can't remember who won the game, Raf.
Brave
okay,
won.
So if you're a fan there, again, they won. But I do wonder, as increasingly people are watching the tail ends of these women's games, they're going to see that's a team they can get behind. And especially, in the cases where your team is winning, I can definitely see some people going, no, I'm going to come to the women's game because, they're really good and I'm going to support them. And so, yeah.
Okay, so I think that what we're kind of gradually coming round to is we were very sceptical about double headers before the tournament started, weren't we? We've traditionally been quite antipathetic towards double headers, I think it's fair to say, because it tends to, or it has tended to sort of reduce the women's game to a bit of a warm-up act. But actually we're seeing to some extent that it doesn't feel like that's happening as much in this competition. There are obviously a few more people coming in for the men's game who have missed some of the women's game, but the crowds that we're getting for the women's matches are very healthy, very good. One thing that I remain a bit sceptical about, though, I have to say, is this idea of, very much been touted by the ECB, of kind of one team, two squads, men's and women's. But we're one team. First of all, I think that we're getting very conflicting messages coming out of different teams about how much contact the men and women are actually allowed to have with each other because of these kind of separate COVID bubbles. And I think that that's kind of being deliberately obscured a bit by the ECB because they don't really want this kind of myth of one team, two squads to be exposed. But the other thing is that if you actually look at the points tables for the men's and the women's, or last time I checked anyway, they look very different. In the men's game, the Welsh Fire are doing really well. They were top last time I checked. But in the women's game, the Welsh Fire are kind of bringing up the rear, as it were. In the women's game, you've very much got kind of Southern Brave and Northern Superchargers doing really well. In the men's game, not so much, although as we kind of mentioned, Brave did win their first game on Friday. So that as well, I think, kind of slightly puts paid to this idea of sort of one team, two squads. And there's been a little bit of talk that what would help bring them together is a combined points table. Any thoughts on that, Sid?
Yeah, it's a mad, crazy idea, isn't it? I mean, okay, I actually think it's not a bad idea in principle, to combine the points, so that means the fans have to care about both of them. The problem is, I don't see how you get a finals day out of it. And, the gods of sport have determined these days, even though the most successful sport in the world, the most successful domestic sporting league in the world is like the Premier League, which doesn't have a finals day. They just add up the points over the whole table. Everyone else nevertheless feels they have to have a finals day. I don't see how you get a finals day that works out of a combined points table. So I think that's a non-starter from that perspective.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think that one of the things that could then end up happening is it breeds resentment instead of kind of unity between your men's and women's teams, because if either the men or the women are perceived to be doing a lot better than the others, then either the male or the female players are then going to start turning around and going, well, you're not kind of pulling your weight here. And I don't think that those kind of feelings of resentment are the ones that we want to be encouraging. I don't think that does anything to achieve the ECB's overall aims. So those are some of our thoughts. Be interested to hear any of yours if you've got them. Do comment on the video on Twitter or below the line on CRICKETher. We'd love to hear from you. We're going to get into Lords now and go and watch this match and see what happens over the coming week in the 100. We'll be back in a week's time with another Vodcast for you. Bye for now.
Bye.